Hi, good morning. Welcome to PBHU, another webinar this week, our last webinar of 2025. If you're joining us for the first time, you can know that your camera is turned off, you are on mute, and we'll get started here in just 1 second. All right, hi, my name is Callie. I'm the Director of Marketing for Promises Behavioral Health. We have been doing PBHU webinars now for over 2 full years. So this is our last webinar for 2025. And today we are finishing the year off with Amber. She's talking to us about motivational therapy. This presentation is called Enhancing Motivation to Promote Change. Amber, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll introduce you. So I'm really pleased to introduce Amber today. She's the clinical director of the Ranch, Pennsylvania. Amber holds a Master of Science from Millersville University and has been working in the behavioral health field for the past 4 years. As a licensed clinician, she is so aligned with what we're doing here at Promises. She brings a deep commitment to delivering high quality, evidence-based care that's rooted in trauma-informed approach. Amber is passionate about empowering clients to explore their stories and moving forward toward becoming the healthiest versions of themselves. So she draws from a variety of clinical modalities to meet each individual's needs and is dedicated to maintaining a high standard of care across the treatment experience. So I'm very grateful that she's here today to share her insight with us. Amber, if you want to go to that next slide, please. If you want to hit over one more, I'm going to introduce Bill and then he can speak to who we are. And I'll also mention, I know this looks a little bit different than our normal screen. So if it's looking a little condensed on your end, that is how it should be looking. Okay, so I'm excited to also introduce Bill. A lot of you know Bill from previous webinars, but Bill is now going to be working with me in tandem on creating our clinical programming here for PBHU. So he's helping me find speakers and making sure people are prepared and making sure we have topics that are aligned with what you all want to hear as clinicians. Since I am a marketing person, it's really great to work with someone that is in a leadership role at Promises to make sure that the PBHU that we're creating for you all is continue to have a high clinical excellence. So Bill, I'm going to let you speak a little bit more about who you are and what you're excited for 2026 for PBHU and our clinical programming across the board at Promises.
Thank you, Callie. One, just excited that y'all are here to join the presentation. I'm excited for Amber finishing off the year really, really strong. So appreciate her and her leadership. We had a great year, 2025. I think we saw a lot of kind of diverse topics. But I think I'm a lot more excited about 2026. One, because I'm involved and working with Callie has been a lot of fun. But I think that we had listened to a lot of what y'all had recommended. So I'm really excited about 2026. I've been with Promises Atlanta for about a year and a half now, but I've been in the industry for a long time. And there's a couple of things that really excites me about Promises. The first thing was just their clinical approach. And I'm sure that Amber will touch on this, but just as a reminder, we have an incredible kind of clinical curriculum that we use. We're trauma informed, we're skills based, and we're family centered. 80% of the curriculum that we do is DBT. And we really like that none of our classes are repeated. So we go about 28 weeks and really train and work on skills based, get them ready for the trauma care that they're either going to do with us, do the trauma at a PHP or wherever they're moving to next. But really love that. And then the second piece is I really like their vision of how they're doing not just these CEUs, but really focused in improving our family care. So I think those things for Promises really kind of makes me proud and excited about continuing to work with them. I love Promises Atlanta, but we have 7 programs across the country, including several in Texas. We've got Massachusetts. We've got, of course, the Ranch in Tennessee, which is an extraordinary program. So I love all of our programs. And I know that for 2026, we just have a variety of speakers coming from across those facilities and programs, and the experience and the knowledge that they're going to bring to the PBHU, I think is really, really going to be good. So I'm excited for next year. I hope that you have already signed up for several CEUs. I'll get to present. I'm probably not the standout. I think Jamise and Rhonda are a couple of standouts. You've probably heard from them. I think January we kick it off great. I think Callie's going to talk a little bit about that, but I think we bring it strong in January. So just excited y'all are here. Thank you again for Amber for finishing out the year strong. And Callie is definitely the brains behind this. Make no mistake about it. So I love learning from her, and she teaches me every day. So I'm grateful to work with her. So hope y'all enjoy this one, and I hope you enjoy the end of 2025 and have a great new year.
Thanks, Bill. I'm grateful for you too. Amber, if you want to go to the next slide, I don't know if I'm going to speak a little bit about, yeah, the webinar today. Okay, great. So the chat box and Q&A, you may have noticed that typically in the chat, we keep it kind of closed so that you only really get to talk to myself and the presenter, but today we're opening it up because Amber is going to be asking you some feedback and having a little more of a dialogue in the chat. So let's open today. I just ask that you keep in mind that for those that prefer having that chat turned off, we try to keep those side conversations to a minimum. If you need anything from me about technology, about CEs, any questions, you can click where it says that to button from everyone. You can pick my name. Or the just host and panelist option, and that will give you direct access to just chat with me about something that you need. If you have questions for Amber regarding the actual presentation, webinar content, resources like that, go ahead and put those questions directly in the Q&A for her. We want to keep those separate so she can come back to those later when we do a little bit of have our break. So just keep that in mind. And you can go to the next slide, and I'll just finish with our CEs. So I know a lot of you are here to get those CEs by the end of the year. Just know that we ask that you don't miss more than 10 minutes of the training. So if you're already here, you're already in a great place. We just ask that you stay the entire time so you can receive your full credit. After the training, you'll get an email that says thank you for attending, and it will send you directly to your attendee dashboard. And from there, you're going to be able to access the evaluation. Once you complete the evaluation, your certificate is automatically added to your CEGO attendee dashboard again. So if you have to return to look for certain certificates or anything that you need by the end of the year, if you've attended CEs with us in the past, they all are now going to be in that one place for you to download. So hopefully it's easy to access. And then as you know, as you continue to come back and see us for other future webinars, you can access all of your CEs, everything's in one place for you. So I think that's it. Oh, you will ask me this again, but slides and resources from Amber, we will be adding those to your attendee dashboard. That will be next week. So don't expect those today. The recording will be up on YouTube by the end of today, but the other slides and everything will go out next week. Okay, Amber, I think that's everything. I did add our registration for January. We added that with Audrey Petty, who has also spoken for PBHU before. She's diving into the changes for ASAM 4. So for those of you that are interested in learning more about that, that will be January's webinar on the 23rd of next month. So I put that in the chat, but you can also find that on the CEGO website. Okay, y'all, thank you so much. Amber, I'm passing this over to you.
All right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So my name is Amber. Just a little bit about me. I've been in the field for about 5 years, and with that experience, I've worked both outpatient and inpatient settings. For outpatient, I focused on students who were deemed high risk, and I was able to kind of help them identify barriers to their success and brainstorm ways to kind of overcome those barriers in order to be successful in an academic setting. For inpatient, which I'm currently at with the Promises Company, the Ranch of Pennsylvania, I worked at a residential setting where I focused on individuals who were struggling with co-occurring concerns. During both these encounters and these experiences, I found just how important it was to help clients, but specifically help them with motivation. I was working with individuals who had barriers in their life that they really were not able to identify, maybe because they didn't want to identify at the time, or maybe because they didn't have the motivation to overcome those barriers once they had insight of those. So I found out quickly that external motivation only would get somebody so far. Right. So parents pressuring you to get a good grade in my academic setting, or, a loved one pressuring you to complete a residential treatment. That external motivation was great to maybe get the ball rolling, but I truly did not see a change in my clients until we started tapping into their internal motivation. That's when true change occurred. And that's really the motivation behind this presentation today. So if we are in a space, let's get started. So we're going to be talking about enhancing motivation to promote change. Some of the objectives today, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because we're going to be talking about it, so you'll know what the objectives are. The objectives we'll be discussing today cover the main focus of the presentation, which is going to be, you're going to be receiving some education on the trans theoretical model in order to understand what the stages of change are and what clients look like when they are in those stages of change. You'll receive tips on how to apply motivational strategies to clients that you're working with, and you'll be able to learn how to integrate these practices that have been proven to help clients succeed in whatever setting that you're helping in. So I am admittedly pretty anxious when I do any kind of speaking event. The moment I hear recording starts, that's when some of the anxiety takes over. So this is going to be a very interactive presentation today. So I would like to start off with an icebreaker. This is a chance for us to get to know each other a little bit more and for you guys to be a little bit more vulnerable and interactive. So let's start by just taking a moment to reflect on your own personal relationship with change. I would like us all to take about 3 to 5 minutes to reflect on a time when you personally tried to change a habit. What was that plan for you? Was there a plan? What helped you change? What made it difficult? So just take a couple minutes based off your own experience. What habit were you trying to change? What helped and what made it difficult? Feel free to enter that into the chat. Getting more timely with documentation. I think we can all relate to that. Quit smoking, that's a good one. Quitting caffeine, as I have not only a cup of coffee, but water with some caffeine neo in it. So I'm reading a lot of healthy habits, right? Changing diet, quit smoking, limiting caffeine. Start working out is one that's jumping out to me. So what helped was setting a schedule. Awesome. What days that you could commit to that activity and a barrier, tired after work, for sure. I think that's where motivation is more than just like a mindset, right? Like we focus on how to tap into external or internal motivation, but sometimes we have logistic barriers, right? We have a 40+ hour work week and our energy isn't where we need to be, or maybe we're sick that week and our energy isn't where it used to be. Physical activity daily, another physical activity one, made the schedule, did the action first with motivation coming after the action. Good. Awesome, guys. Thank you. I appreciate everybody being vulnerable and sharing their own personal experience with this because it is something that we all experience. Based off of what I just read, it sounds like we all had some experience with successful and maybe unsuccessful attempts to change. I'm sure we can really empathize with the following statement that change is really scary. We typically have a really adverse reaction to being faced with change because change breaks us away from our norms, our habits, what makes us comfortable. In those norms, we've created predictability and comfort, whether it's overall healthy for us or not. We've come to kind of enjoy those habits in some way. It gives us something. If anything, it gives us the comfort that we know it's there. So while we might know that, hey, I could probably lose a couple pounds, the comfort around coming home and relaxing after a long day has just become so habitual. The fact of changing that it's scary. Getting somebody ready to change or to experience some kind of change is a very unique experience, as everyone has their own relationship with change. So, in this presentation, we're going to discuss some effective ways to help support and promote other people as they're navigating their change. Some of you might be familiar with this model, but a model that's been very effective when helping individuals navigate change is called the trans-theoretical model. This is also known as the stages of change. Um, this was actually a model created to help help others understand why some people were able to quit smoking pretty easily while others really struggled. Um, the two individuals who published this model, let's see, James Prochaska and Carlo Di Clemente. These individuals were interested in understanding why some people were able to stop smoking independently fairly easily, while others really failed to cease the unhealthy habit despite all their intention to. It's a cyclical model that has 6 stages or 6 steps where individuals navigate through change. They may need to go through the model a couple times in order to be successful, but each time they learn a little bit more in order to help lead them to true long-lasting change. The model is also the model is also an intentional change model. That means that the model can only help change the behavior once the individual entering it wants the change. So going back to my previous slides where I mentioned external and internal motivation, this model truly enhances somebody's internal motivation to change. They have the insight that they want to change. They have the motivation. This model helps them navigate once that internal motivation is identified. There are 6 stages in the cyclical model. Individuals entering the first stage, which is called pre-contemplation. When someone's in this stage, they completely lack insight and judgment. There is absolutely no intention on taking action towards change because they don't even have the awareness that they're engaging in problematic behaviors. They have no concept of the consequences tied to their behaviors, and in their minds, the cost of changing the behavior completely outweighs the benefit. So they're completely not interested in change at this time. What's interesting about these individuals is they also struggle with poor self-esteem and lack confidence that they have the ability to change. So they don't even want to change, they don't see the need to change, but there's always an underlying reason, right? Usually that is a deep-seated fear. They don't have the self-esteem that even if they were faced to change, that they would be able to overcome that. The second stage of the model is referred to as the contemplation change. I'm sorry, the contemplation stage. In this stage, individuals start to build insight. They are aware that there is a need for change. However, they aren't necessarily ready to change. These individuals believe the cost of changing their behaviors is far too great. Um, so they don't even see the reason why they would give up the behavior. Why would they give up something they enjoy or something that offers them something or something that they just strictly want to do? So despite having the awareness of the problem behavior or the consequences tied to that problem behavior, they're still not really looking to change that behavior. This is when this may be when someone starts to experience something we call dissonance or the lack of harmony they feel within two conflicting truths, right? As an example, someone might say, I know my drinking's hurting my relationship with my family, but I really enjoy going out on the weekend with my friends, right? Both those truths are very real to that individual, but they're very conflicting feelings while being a part of both of them. The third stage is called preparation. So, this is when an individual accepts that taking action can maybe improve their lifestyle, that the benefits to change are starting to outweigh the cost, and they're entertaining the idea of change. Individuals in this stage are looking to ways that they can change, but they're not really acting on them yet. They're starting to do some research, they're starting to pinball some ideas around. They're starting to look into ways that they can move forward with change. But they might start considering smaller indirect changes that they can do in the meantime as they prepare for this bigger change that they're considering. So this might look like an individual may switch to a light beer when they go out on the weekends. They're not committed to abstinence, they're not committed to sobriety quite yet, but hey, I can go out and instead of an IPA, I'll have a light beer instead. Or I'll only stay out for a couple hours versus my all-nighters that I had previous weekends. So they're not so much at a big change yet. They're not really committed to complete sobriety yet, but maybe they'll do some smaller changes that can help them get to that bigger change eventually, which is really great because that could be um, a big confidence boost, right? Because, like I said, in pre-contemplation, individuals might not even have insight that their behavior is problematic, but they also might have this fear or this poor self-esteem that they could change. So doing those little indirect changes just to show that they can could be a really big self-esteem boost for that bigger change that's hopefully coming later. The fourth stage is where we start to see huge shifts, and this is when they are committed to action. So the fourth stage is the action stage. In this stage, the individual is taking steps in completing their plan. The small changes get easier, bigger commitments start to occur. They are not only talking the talk, but they're walking the walk. They're committed to that big change that's so needed because the consequences of that problem behavior is just something that they're not willing to continue to engage in. The fifth stage is something called maintenance. So this stage occurs when an individual has committed to their changed behavior for 6 months or more. They've maintained that big commitment for 6 months. It's starting to become habit. These individuals, they're finding their new way of living, their new norms. Individuals have developed a sense of confidence in this stage towards change, but are still mindful that they need to avoid temptations not to fall back into old habits, because those are always kind of in the back of their minds, right? So this stage could be lifelong, and we will talk about what that might look like later. But a final stage that is important to mention, it's not always the most positive stage to mention, but it's very important to include it in the stages of change model, is the relapse slash recycle stage. So again, this isn't the positive stage, right? We don't want to commit to the idea of change knowing that we might fail. But it's completely necessary to mention this because, as we'll talk about later, it's really important to normalize setbacks. So this stage has also been referred to as the reoccurrence or the termination stage. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to refer it to as relapse slash recycle. That's just the stage name that I'm most familiar with, so that's going to come out a little bit faster than the others. In this stage, individuals may slip back. They may slip back to previous stages or may slip back to the behavior entirely. They might be engaging in that previously identified maladaptive behavior more regularly, and this could result in an individual having to re-enter the stages of change model from the beginning or at another previously completed stage. So it's important to mention that once individuals commit to change, they start at pre-contemplation and work forward. If they do experience a relapse or they do experience themselves in the relapse slash recycle stage, they can re-enter the stages of change in a different stage other than pre-contemplation. They can go back to preparation or they can go back to action. All right, so I have a little activity just to make sure that everybody's listening. So based off of the previously discussed definitions, I have a couple examples that I'm hoping that you guys can match which stage these individuals are in. So number one, the stage of change. I know I need to stop, but I'm not sure if I can. Based off of our previous conversation, which stage is that? I know I need to stop, but I'm not sure if I can. Awesome, guys. I'm seeing a lot of contemplation. So this is the second stage, contemplation. I'm also seeing some pre-contemplation. So this is a really important note because those two stages can really overlap with each other, right? I'm not sure if I can, so he's not committed. They're not committed to change completely. But what sets us apart from pre-contemplation, if we recall, pre-contemplation is almost like complete denial. The individual has no awareness that their behavior is a problem. right? So in this stage, a lot of the change talk actually comes from outsiders, right? So maybe I have a nagging husband who's saying, hey, you really got to stop drinking on the weekends. Or I have a friend saying, hey, you really seem to be overdoing it. But if I'm in pre-contemplation, I'm brushing off those opinions. I'm brushing off those statements. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I can handle it. Um, it's really not that big of a deal. But what makes number one contemplation is that we're starting to see someone develop just a little bit of insight. They're not committed to change. They maybe don't think that they can change, but they're identifying that a change should happen, right? I know I need to stop. That's showing that individual has just a little bit of insight that their behavior is problematic, but they're not committed or they don't even know where to start when it comes to change. So well done on everybody who said contemplation, and thank you for those who said pre-contemplation, because like I said, there's a lot of overlap between those two stages, and those can be really hard to decipher. All right, number two, I'm going to attend my first meeting next week. I'm going to attend my first meeting next week. Good, good. I'm seeing almost a 50-50 split, like in the previous example, between preparation and action. So I'm seeing a lot of prep and a lot of action. So for this example, I have preparation, and that's just because, again, I completely understand how people are saying both. But remember, preparation is talking the talk, right? I'm doing research on what could be helpful to change. I'm gonna brainstorm some ideas that could help me change this behavior. But action is when we're walking the walk, right? Action is when we actually go to that first meeting. So I'm going to attend my first meeting next week. That's going to be more preparation because we haven't done it quite yet. But once that individual goes to that first meeting, right, then we're in action. So well done on trying to kind of identify the two. I know that there is going to be some overlap between some of these examples, but that's why I actually chose them because you can see that it's not always going to be like a clean cut answer. So well done, everybody. Number three, I don't think my drinking is a problem. Good. A lot of pre-contemplations. Yep, you guys got it. So well done. Based off of the carryover from the first conversation, the first example, this one completely has no insight, right? No awareness that their behavior is a problem. I don't think my drinking is a problem is definitely pre-contemplation. They're not considering change at all. Number four, I slipped last week, but I want to keep trying. Good. A lot of relapse, recycle, right? So this might not be a full-blown relapse, right? This could just be considered a lapse or a slip up. This individual slipped up on their behavior last week, but they still have that motivation to keep trying. So they have entered into the relapse recycle stage, and then they might consider entering the model. They're not going all the way back to pre-contemplation. They're not in contemplation, but they might start considering preparation or action. Good. And then the last example, number five, I've been sober for 6 months. You guys got it. Yep, maintenance. So again, there's a lot of overlap between action and maintenance, because action is walking the walk, right? We committed to that change behavior. Change is becoming easier. But we've officially entered maintenance once we committed to that changed behavior for 6 months plus. Good job. Thank you guys. I appreciate everybody interacting and giving me a break just to kind of make sure that I'm being clear in my presentation and also having some good clinical conversations. Again, these stages aren't black and white. There's a lot of overlap, which is why it's important to not only go over some specific definitions, but conceptualize them. What do they actually look like in real life? So, as I mentioned earlier, my residential experience does the main population I have experience with in residential settings is adults with co-occurring concerns. So it is important for me to mention some co-occurring challenges. When interacting with individuals with co-occurring concerns, they might have slightly different challenges to overcome when it comes to change behavior that other individuals might not. So now that we talked about change, it's already difficult, right? It's difficult for everybody. We even shared our own personal experience with how challenging change could be. But individuals who are struggling with co-occurring, they have some additional barriers that are worth mentioning compared to others that might not have this experience. Individuals struggling with co-occurring concerns, they have to face the way that their co-occurring symptoms are interacting with each other. This could look like someone attempting to remain sober gets hit with a wave of post-acute withdrawal symptoms, right? And they start to experience a spike in anxiety, which really increases the desire to reach for alcohol that, it serves as a depressant. It's going to lower those hyperaroused symptoms. So they might be completely motivated, but unfortunately, the way that their body is reacting to sobriety, it's hitting them with a whole new level of anxiety that someone who might not have that substance in their body before, they might have some anxiety regarding change, but the severity level is very different for individuals who have some co-occurring concerns. This might also look like someone attempting to remain abstinent from self-harm. They might relapse on a previously used substance as a new form of punishment, right? So while they might not be engaging in their previously identified self-harm habits, they're replacing it with maybe a substance use that they previously stepped away from or they previously stopped. So the interplay of mental health and substance use symptoms often lead to an increased risk of relapse for individuals who struggle with co-occurring concerns. These individuals might also experience a stronger level of ambivalence and have really inconsistent levels of motivation. So, the motivation, the part that we play when it comes to somebody who is trying to become motivated towards change, we have a really important role in helping individuals navigate these stages of change. Yes, they can do it naturally within themselves, but us as professional helpers, it's important that we understand how we can help somebody navigate these stages. So it's important to know what the stages of change it just simply offers as a roadmap, right? It's a roadmap for change, but it doesn't perfectly depict what change may need to look like for individuals. This isn't a foolproof method, as it doesn't always consider all variables that can occur towards somebody while they're experiencing a change. However, it's a very simple demonstration that can serve as a starting point for those interested in change. But now that we've talked about what each stage represents, how individuals look like in each stage, how they might present, let's shift gears and talk about how us as professional helpers, how can we help clients move through these stages of change? We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail then, but regarding pre-contemplation, if somebody is completely lacking insight that their behavior needs to change, then our role is a lot of rapport building, right? We're trying to meet the client where they're at, but we're also trying to help them raise their own awareness of that their problematic behaviors. In contemplation, this is where we might start exploring ambivalence with the individual. In preparation, we're helping them build confidence and set concrete plans. Action, we're reinforcing effort and skills that can be helpful during this change. Maintenance, we're doing some relapse prevention. And during relapse, we're helping them normalize setbacks and get them back into the process as soon as possible. So let's look at this a little bit more specifically regarding each stage of change. So, as professional helpers, we play a pivotal role in helping others navigate through change. As previously discussed, individuals in the pre-contemplation stage lack complete awareness that change needs to occur. This is when we may experience the most resistance when working with these individuals. It's important that we help these individuals increase their awareness on how their behaviors are problematic by personalizing the risk tied to inaction. Most importantly, we need to maintain a non-judgmental stance regarding these individuals' unwillingness to change, lead with empathy and gentle but factual feedback and information. So, some helpful skills that we can incorporate in our conversations with individuals that are in pre-contemplation. This includes processing the results of previous changed behaviors. This could be a really big self-esteem boost, right? Because, at that point, did they ever change a behavior? What worked in those moments where they decided to change a behavior? And really pulling out those successes to kind of help boost that confidence that the individual is capable of change. And also in those processing moments with those clients, identifying the individual strengths that were discovered in those processing moments that were tied to those experiences. A lot of clients in the pre-contemplation stage don't have good self-esteem. They are fearful of change. They don't want to even consider change. So they might be rejecting or completely avoiding the idea of change. So when we're taking a moment to be non-judgmental and just engage them in conversation and identifying that, hey, you have changed in the past. You have done big things before. It might be small to them, but you have changed. And in those changes, I've identified that you are resilient. I've identified that you're creative, right? And pulling out those strengths and putting those in front of the client so the client can start to raise their insight on that they are capable of change, but also they've done it before. It just might look a little different. Some other skills that I found to be helpful for individuals who are in pre-contemplation is also utilizing pros and cons list. And in those pros and cons list, we can, help them identify, if you maintain this behavior, what's that going to give you? What's it going to cost you? But also, if you change that behavior, what are you going to possibly get from it? And what can you lose from it? So it might also be beneficial to obtain collateral information from others involved in the individual's life during this stage, as their perception might be a little bit more factual, while the individual in pre-contemplation, their perception might be a little skewed. So if I'm doing a pros and cons list with somebody who completely lacks insight, they might not really know what the cost is, right? Or the con is. So if I take some time to connect with a family member, maybe I can use that information to say, hey, like, could a possible con be mom stops inviting you over to holidays, right? Because she doesn't want to see you consistently ruin the holiday because of getting drunk or something like that. A lot of my examples are going to be alcohol use, guys, just that's because of my personal experience in the field. If you guys want other examples, please throw them in the chat. Like, hey, how can I, relate this to someone who's self-harming or is isolating or something like that? And I can change my delivery on that way. So, some examples of what that might sound like if we are using non-judgmental stance, empathy, gentle feedback. We might be saying something, hey, on one hand, you enjoy using, on the other hand, it's really impacted the way that your sister looks at you, right? The people that are so close in your life. Um, they are really having a hard time seeing you continue to engage in this behavior, even though you're really enjoying it, and really explore that dissonance of those two truths. It's also really important to um, not only look at like short-term pros and cons, but long-term as well, especially with substance use, focusing on what that individual is doing to their body in the long term. Because a lot of times people have a really narrow, short sight of their behavior, and it's really hard for them to consider long-term consequences of continued use. All right, I saw some movement in the chat before we move on. What about someone who is upset about how others are treating them? I think that's a really good point. If, especially somebody who's in pre-contemplation, right? And then we'll move on to the next slide. I knew I would get distracted with the chat, but this is what I love. I love clinical conversation. Um, I think that's a really good point for someone who's in pre-contemplation and has no insight that their behavior is problematic and they're starting to feel really upset um, regarding how other people may be judging them or the comments that they're making or treating them differently because of that behavior. I think that's where it's really important for us as helping professionals to take that non-judgmental and empathetic approach with them, right? We're not shoving them towards change, right? Because they're getting a lot of pressure from other people in their life probably at this stage, but we're really there helping them understand like and validating that feeling. Yeah, it is really upsetting when you're doing something that other people don't like, or it is really upsetting constantly getting criticism from other people. Um, and really holding that space for that emotion part. I think that's really beautiful for rapport building. And with that rapport, maybe we can help use that to initiate change down the road. So meeting that client where they're at and just sticking with the feelings. Well, great question. Um, okay, moving on to contemplation. So, as previously discussed, individuals in contemplation stage start to gain insight that a change is needed, but they still lack a commitment to taking action. This is when we may experience the individual being really ambivalent towards change, which could be quite frustrating as a helping professional because they're just right on the fence, right? It's important that we help these individuals increase their motivation to choose change. We can help them by doing this by resolving their ambivalence, really. Helpful ways a professional can help resolve ambivalence is continuing to utilize pros and cons, especially pros and cons based off of what the client is saying. But also help boost the individual's self-efficacy towards change, meaning boost the individual's belief that they are capable of change. So this might look like we offer realistic expectations of what change could look like. We might introduce motivational affirmations that the client can use and refer to those past processing moments where they've identified that they have changed before. And we can also explore when those past attempts to change were there. What was the positive experience for the client? So again, internal motivation, right? We are tapping into their own personal experience. So, what worked for you when, gosh, the new cars put a ding on every time you don't put your seatbelt on? That was a huge change for all of us, depending on our ages. So when you did have to start creating a habit of putting your seatbelt on every time you turned on your car, how did you do it? That took patience, that took creativity, that took a lot of strengths that you did when you were making that change towards a safer behavior and really bringing that to the client's attention so they can see, yeah, I have done things before, I have changed before. It might not be so scary, but also applying that conversation to what we just talked about, pros and cons, but also just reminding them like change is scary, but it's very unlikely that at the ripe age of whatever you are right now that you haven't done other changes before. So let's lean into those other changes and see how we can apply it to this one. So being able to resolve that ambivalence is such an important role in individuals with contemplation because we're showing them that they can, and that could be a really rewarding experience. So say we get that individual committed to change, the ambivalence is gone and they fully entered preparation. So as we discussed, preparation is when individuals have chosen change. They've chosen change externally, hopefully internally. They are motivated towards it. And they start to look at what needs to be done in order for change to occur. So this is when we may experience the individual becoming overwhelmed, right, with what they need to do in order to change. This could be a big barrier for clients, resulting in a huge decrease in motivation, right? You did all this hard work and you just committed to the idea of change, and then they start looking into how much therapy will cost, where support meetings are, the commitment of doing 90 and 90 while working a 40-hour work week, right? having to get creative on how to spend time with friends because we're, not going out every weekend, right? This could be really overwhelming for a client to experience. And they might be very quick to say, absolutely not. There's no way I can do this. The motivation's out the window. So for this stage, it's really important for professional helpers to help individuals by building their confidence, but also helping assist them with planning their strategies. We can view a selection of options for them and help them pick what strategy is most realistic for them. We can make sure that their options are easily accessible and talk out ways that they can, you know, yes, this might have worked for somebody else, but you can have a say in what works for you, which is really great for, promoting autonomy and allowing the client picking the best plan for them. We can help them identify potential barriers in these possible plans and discuss plans on how they can overcome those barriers. We can also help them break down the big, scary change into smaller, more manageable steps. I've seen this with a lot of my individuals anyway, where they're committed to the big change and they want to do all the things, and then they quickly realize all the things can't be done just like that. So we break it down, right? So, okay, I understand like sobriety is the big goal. What does sobriety need to look like today, right? Or within the next hour? Can we focus on that little time frame and then make a more realistic game plan for that time frame? And then we can build off of that. That really helps alleviate a lot of their anxiety regarding change. We can also help them identify external supports that can offer them reassurance and let them know that they're not doing this alone and that there are not only additional eyes on them for support, but for accountability as well. Because as we know, the moment we make a public announcement towards change, there is that extra layer of, um, there's that extra layer of people are watching me, I need to do this, right? Um, Taking action. So when we take action, and you guys might see, guys, I included some links with some helpful tools. We'll talk about some helpful skills later. You guys can do your own research. I know you'll have access to these slides later, so feel free to use the links or the skills that are mentioned. Feel free to do some additional research on what those skills are and also how you can apply it to maybe the individuals you're working with. Moving on to action. So, as previously discussed, action stage is individuals who are not only talking the talk, but they're walking the walk at this point, right? They're taking action towards their changed behavior. This is when we may experience the individual becoming overly confident in their ability to change, or being overly critical of their efforts to change, right? I got this. I went to a meeting every day this week. This shit's easy, right? And then with that overconfidence, they kind of lose sight on the other things that are going on around them, right? The other barriers that might be creeping in or the other temptations that might be creeping in. Or they might be becoming overly critical. Crap, I was supposed to go to my 5 o'clock meeting, but my boss gave me this last minute project and I missed it. I missed today's meeting, right? I'm a failure. I messed up. I might as well relapse, like that all or nothing thinking that might come with change, right? So it's really important that we are aware of some of the barriers that somebody might be experiencing in action to help them overcome those. So these barriers can result in a client completely overlooking or underestimating the barriers that are in front of them, and they can bump them into old habits. It's also important that we, as helping professionals, help these individuals by just reinforcing progress, not perfection, right? This might look like simply supporting realistic views towards change and helping them identify high-risk behaviors, right? So, hey, that's great. You're feeling confident in going to these meetings, but that doesn't necessarily mean your Friday happy hour date should happen, right? So helping them kind of identify while you're doing great in some areas, we still need to be focused on the other barriers that might be around, right? We might want to be a little bit more cautious or prepare that when we're in front of this barrier, how we're going to overcome it. So we don't want to necessarily allow them to lose sight on the main goal, the main change. Um, and then we can also help them, once those barriers are identified, we can help them create a plan on how to manage or cope with the stress once those barriers might be in front of them, right? That's great that you did all those meetings. Okay, you want to go that happy hour date. What are some potential barriers that might come up? How can we navigate the uncomfortability of being around alcohol and not ordering, right? The anxiety that might come up. So we can help them boost their confidence and, stay in that positive mindset, but also be realistic. Like, hey, when and if this comes up, what can we do? So help grounding them in a really realistic way, I think is really helpful. So anyway, each time we help individuals overcome a barrier, we're pushing away a relapse, or we're delaying a relapse. So some other tips for professional helpers is to encourage a client to reward themselves for milestones, to keep change exciting and rewarding. And of course, we know it just increases those dopamine hits, right? So we are creating realistic check-in logs. We are telling them, hey, if you accomplished 5 out of 7 meetings in a week, how are you going to reward yourself, right? Are you going to, I don't know, treat yourself to getting your nails done? Are you going to, um, tell your family of your success that week? So, how are you going to reward yourself for this behavior to keep that motivation there? Moving on to maintenance. So, as previously discussed, individuals in maintenance have maintained positive change behaviors for 6 months or more. So, this is when we may still experience the individual being overly confident or excessively complacent. So this could be a barrier to clients, resulting in them falling back into old traps or old habits. It's important we help these individuals by continuing a reward system that is new and keeps it exciting. We can help individuals by just stacking up their protective factors, pulling in additional supports, pulling in additional education, pulling in additional skills. We want to make sure during maintenance we are depositing into the protective piggy bank, right? So when temptation or slips happen, right? It might deplete them, but not completely like take them back to zero. So in maintenance, we are just trying to build all the protective factors to try to continue to push those relapses or those slip ups as far away as possible. We're building their support network, and we are also discussing relapse prevention in case some old habits may reemerge. So maybe someone doesn't completely, pick up a drink, but they're going out to bars and being social. Like maybe they're entering into temptation or, they find themselves showing up late to meetings, right? Because they're not prioritizing the punctuality piece of it. Like, oh, I'll get there when I get there, right? We can start seeing the relapse before the relapse. So, reviewing relapse prevention plans with these individuals could be really helpful. And finally, unfortunately, this is a part of change. An individual may enter into that relapse stage. So, if you recall, they've fallen completely back into old habits. They started engaging in the behavior that we previously identified was problematic. It's important that we help these individuals who have experienced a relapse to not be too unkind to themselves, right? Setbacks are normal and maybe even expected, right? As we talked about earlier, unfortunately, individuals who struggle with co-occurring concerns, the chances of relapse are, pretty high. So we want to help them frame the setback as a learning opportunity, not necessarily a failure. And I think this is something that is really beautiful that the stages of change offers. It's, hey, like you might have went back a couple stages, but you don't need to start from ground zero again. What worked, what didn't, what can we do, and let's get you back in the model. So help the client process through the recent relapse and explore any possible triggers that may have been present. Help identify alternative coping skills that can be utilized for the next time. I found personally that the chain of analysis skill might be really helpful for individuals processing the moment where they relapsed. Maybe somebody who is trying to become more med compliant, um, they the chain of analysis can help them identify like, well, yeah, no, duh. You skipped your meds. Um your people pleasing kicked in. You stayed late from work. You still pushed yourself to go to the gym. You overslept. You grabbed your granola bar instead of making breakfast. Yeah, I could totally see how taking your meds slipped your mind. Let's identify if that happens again, what could we do instead? We're reminding the individuals that they do have strengths, right? And they have resiliency. And that can be identified in those previous stages, right? Hey, you've done it. You got this far. What helped? That's still a part of you. One event doesn't make you lose those strengths entirely. So, how can we tap back into them? And encourage them to get back into it as soon as possible, right? The more time we delay them re-entering the model, the higher it is that they're going to lose that motivation for that overall change again. So we need to help by offering kind of a balance between being a reminding them of their realistic coach that's in them, right? Hey, you have these strengths, you can get to them again. Let's create a plan, but also helping them tap into some kind affirmations, kind of helping them be not only a coach, but a cheerleader. What do you need to say yourself to get up, to get moving, to get back into it again? With that being said, it's time for me to take a break. I have a case vignette, so I'm hoping that we can take a couple minutes to look over this example and kind of use that chat again to talk about what we could do for this individual that we might be helping. So this individual is struggling with depression and alcohol use disorder. She's saying that drinking helps me feel normal, but I hate how I feel the next day. So I'm curious, based off of what we've talked about so far, what stage is she in, but also what motivational strategies as a helping professional could you use to help her move along to the next stage, or help her feel okay with being in that stage, but get her just maybe to the next one? So what stage is she in, and what can you do to kind of help push her to the next stage? Someone who's struggling with depression and alcohol use. Drinking helps me feel normal, but I hate how it makes me feel the next day. Mm. Hmm. For sure, contemplation. I agree there, right? She's showing some insight that the behavior is problematic. She's not necessarily committed to change, though. She's just identifying the dissonance, right? The two truths that are very conflicting. It makes me feel normal, but it really makes me feel crappy the next day. And that's a really hard place to be in because those two truths are very valid. Mm. Explaining the cost, the pros and cons, right? So she's in contemplation. Oh, I love the psychoeducation of how alcohol use is exacerbating her mental health symptoms. Well done, right? So we're already struggling with depression, and you're quite literally placing a depressant into your body. What might that look like mood wise? What might that look like ADL wise? What might that look like cognitively? I love that. And then again, pros and cons. This is where, if you continue to drink, yes, that does offer you something. Here are the pros of that experience, but also this is what it's costing you. This is how it's impacting you negatively. I saw something about value. So what's really cool about all this is you guys are very engaged in this, and I find one that I really like, and then in a millisecond later, there's about five other responses. Oh, point out the setbacks as learning opportunities. I like that. Other strategies to improve depression. Yes. Okay, so drinking, you like how it makes you feel. It could be impacting your mood the next day. I'd be curious to see how when she says how I feel the next day, does she mean physically? Does she mean emotionally? Um, but if that's the case, then let's lean into the depression side of your story. What can we do to improve these symptoms? So if you do have a drink, it doesn't exacerbate them. I did see something about values too. Yes, I think that's really important for somebody who's in pre-content, or I'm sorry, in contemplation, who's very identifying that there's a problem and that change might need to occur, but they haven't really committed to that change. I think tapping into somebody's value system is a really good way to spark internal motivation, because it's a part of them, right? So if Maria really values physical health, right? But she's drinking the next day, she physically doesn't have energy to get up and go for her walks, or she is hit with this overwhelming sense of depression and just wants to isolate and like stay in bed all day the next day. That could be really pulling away from her value of health, right? And that could be a really conflicting space to be in. And that could really make her, feel even more depressed, right? I'm shaming myself that I skipped the gym or skipped my walks. I feel guilty that I'm not acting in a way that my values align with. So I love tapping into somebody's value work, or type value system and pulling that out and kind of use that to motivate their recovery. Treatment. What are your values? Made me realize. Yeah, yeah. Again, to that distance, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your own personal experience. I completely agree with that. When you're living in a way that like doesn't align with your value system that you hold so close to you, right? That is a really conflicting space, like I said, and it could really exacerbate the co-occurring side of our stories, the depression, the guilt, the shame, and can really make us pull away and continue to isolate or maybe even self-punish, which keeps us away from change. I think a lot too is sometimes people don't really understand what their values are, or they might be in a space where they know what their values were when they were being taught them, maybe growing up, but they really haven't had a chance to identify what their own personal values are. And that's okay. That's where I will say, guys, like external motivation is still um, really important when it comes to change. Maybe somebody can't tap into internal motivation yet because they don't really know what that looks like. External motivation could be a good starting system to get the ball rolling. Okay. All right. So the chat slowed down a little bit. So with that being said, we can move on. I know we've talked about some skills throughout this conversation already. That's just who I am as an LPC. I'm very like theory and very skill oriented. But I want to talk about some evidence-based tools that have been shown to help individuals with change. We're going to talk about motivational interviewing and OARS a little bit in a little bit more detail in the next couple slides. But some other evidence-based tools that have been really helpful. We've mentioned DBT chain of analysis. We've um, talked about cognitive restructuring. Some additional ones that I want to mention are contingency management. So creating that reward system, that reward plan for when we hit those milestones. How are we going to feel good about those? How are we going to get that dopamine hit? But also using CBT and DBT not only for coping skills to regulate through the uncomfortability, but cognitive restructuring to keep that realistic and positive mindset as well. So I sprinkled some helpful skill references throughout the presentation, but let's talk about a couple more a little bit specifically. Um, Helpful skills you can use to help individuals navigate the stages of change if they are in pre-contemplation. OARS is going to be one of the best skills that you could use. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a moment, but OARS really helps you build rapport with a client, establish trust in that working relationship. It helps you identify patterns of ambivalence and helps build insight. when you're experiencing somebody in contemplation, you guys have been doing a great job with these vignettes. You also offered pros and cons list. So pros and cons can just help build insight, right? It's allowing them to see what their behavior is doing not only to them, but to other people alone. Oh, I'm sorry, I just read the chat. Um, it helps them understand what their behavior is doing to them, but also to other people. If they are in preparation, using relapse prevention skills, identifying potential triggers, identifying helpful coping skills that can navigate those triggers, identifying support or a plan to overcome those triggers. Also, people in preparation might benefit from pros and cons as well. If they're in preparation and have five plans in front of them, right? Pros and cons can be really helpful to identify what plan fits into their life, right? If my plan to lose weight is to go to a gym every day, 7 days a week for 2 hours, but I work at a 24/7 residential facility and work 60-hour weeks, right? That plan might not necessarily be the best for my life. So that pros and cons list can really hone in on a realistic game plan. Preparation is also when you would start to introduce the concept of contingency management. Like I said earlier, contingency management is just establishing a reward system. It's always a good dopamine hit when you're being rewarded for your hard behavior, right? So that might be like at work, you get done your project and you get a big shout out, right? Your boss shouts you out to the community or your facility or your organization for your hard work. It might be rewarding yourself with, purchasing something that you've been it's a comfort item, right? So maybe I want to go get my nails done, I think I said earlier. But also in preparation, the idea of mastering decomposition, wow, is really important. And all that term means is that you're breaking down these really complex concepts into smaller, more manageable chunks, right? If they are in preparation or even in action stage, mastering decomposition is really helpful because it's taking this big overwhelming goal and breaking it down into smaller, more manageable goals, which again, we know that once you complete that task, you're going to get hit with that dopamine hit, which could really reinforce continued motivation. Again, contingency management, even into action. So, this is what I said earlier about these stages kind of having a lot of overlap. So, in preparation, you might develop that contingency management plan. If I make it 2 weeks with going to the gym 3 out of 7 days, how am I going to reward myself? But then in action, we want to make sure that we're carving out time for that reward system just as much as we carved out time for the changed behavior. Something else in action stage that might be helpful is opposite action. So if we are feeling, I don't know, angry that I'm missing a movie, but I have to go to the gym to stay in my plan, right? How can I act out in an opposite way other than, being angry and taking that anger out on myself? Can I find a way to be grateful that I'm going to the gym? And can I practice some gratitude statements? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of some examples, but really, I'm just trying to put the names out there so you guys can research what these skills are and, conceptualize how you can apply it to your clients. Um, if my depression is telling me you're not worthy of your steps today, stay in bed, right? Opposite action can help me pull away from that depressed thought. And can I just like stand up outside of my bed for a couple minutes? Can I just stand up outside of my bed and do some light stretching before I lay back down, right? And who knows, maybe that dopamine hit that I get from standing up and stretching can, take me, can I just walk outside to my hallway and then back to my bed? So I still get some steps in, right? It's teaching you that you can pull away from those unhealthy or unhelpful emotions or thoughts, really, and just do an opposite action to just show that you can pull away from your mental health brain or your addict brain. Some additional skills that I want to mention are DBT, like concepts of mindfulness and emotion regulation skills. When you have somebody in preparation or action, really any stage, the uncomfortable feelings that our clients or our, whoever we're working with might experience in any stage of the stages of change model could be really consuming. It could be really overwhelming to them. So, teaching mindfulness techniques and teaching that individual to identify that feeling, identify that uncomfortability, and soothe themselves out of it, right? Hey, I'm noticing a pit in my stomach that I'm getting really overwhelmed with all these plans and ideas in front of me. I have no idea which one's going to work, right? Okay, let's take a moment, right? We don't need to move forward with the planning, but can we just take a moment to focus on that pit in your stomach? Can we do some paced breathing to get maybe see if we can relieve some of that pit? Can we do some diaphragm breathing to open up that space and see if we can remove some of that pit feeling? Also, some CBT, we mentioned earlier, cognitive restructuring. This is going to be really helpful in teaching individuals to identify really unhelpful thought patterns and replacing those thought patterns with more realistic or positive mindset. Um, we don't necessarily want to be the cheerleader, right? But we can teach them, how to look at, instead of labeling it as a failure, can we label it as a setback or an interception? Can we come up with a realistic replacement thought of, instead of I'm a failure, can we just say I failed? I failed at a task. Um, can we go a step further and identify like gratitude? I'm thankful for my experience because I learned what I can avoid next time. Um, I'm a I'm a strong person who's got me this far. I'm going to take that strength and get me a little bit farther next time, right? Can we really help them identify the uncomfortable feelings and soothe those possibly through some DBT exercises, but also take it one step further and get the mind and body to connect, right? Okay, I feel a little bit better. The pit in my stomach's a little less intense, and now I'm going to pair that with I'm not a failure. I failed and I'm thankful for that experience. And this is my game plan next time. And really see if that can really enhance that motivation to get back into the stages of change model quicker. Um, let's see. I do this. I have this all typed up and I know exactly what I want to say. And then I just start going off script and I'm like, oh, what did we already talk about? Again, relapse, recycle. I want to go into this one more time. Chain of analysis is beautiful for identifying the buildup that somebody may have overlooked. Um, Leading them to relapse in those behaviors, right? So slowing down and, it's not all or nothing, right? They didn't go from leaving their house one day to missing their meds. There was a lot of stuff that happened there. So let's slow down and identify some things that could have contributed to this behavior. And then in each one of those chain links, you identify a game plan to how we can like not fall into that trap again. So the next time you do oversleep and you rush out the door, what is a game plan you can do to make sure that you're at least getting something in your stomach to take your meds? And really slowing down the process that way. And again, breaking it into smaller, more manageable chunks. Let's see. We already talked about DBT mindfulness concepts to help the client regulate through any of the stages, but also through any of the difficult conversations. I remember somebody said earlier, like, how can we help somebody who's upset about how other people are treating them in pre-contemplation, right? Because they don't really know what they're doing is problematic, but they're really feeling upset that people are always criticizing them, judging them, whatever. Um, I think being able to validate that emotion that they might be experiencing, like what is upset, right? I understand I would be upset too. But like, how does upset look for you? Or how does upset feel for you? Can we take a moment and distract from that upset for a second? Can we ground in this present moment and just pull away from that icky feeling? And it really teaches that client to tackle some really uncomfortable feelings that might pop up not only before they start the change, but while they get farther into the model. Anyway, there are a ton of helpful skills out there. These are just ones that I personally have found to be really helpful when working specifically in an inpatient setting, but more specifically working with co-occurring adults. Um, the co-occurring piece, the mental health side of it is really where these skills come in handy because there is a spike of anxiety, a spike of guilt and shame and depression and a lot of uncomfortable emotions tied to somebody who's trying to commit to change. So these skills I found to be helpful anyway, and I wanted to share. Callie, I see a lot of questions about taking a break in the chat. I don't know where that's at. I don't know what time that break should be. So if you want to jump in and help guide that, I can keep going or we can take a break.
Yeah, if you have the time, Amber, if we want to take a 5 minute break since we're about, a little over halfway, we can do that if this is a good time for you. Or, yeah, is that okay? Do we have
Yeah,
time?
whatever you guys are up. This is my first time, so whatever is normal for you guys. Like I said, I only have a couple more slides, but if we want to take like a 5 minute break, that's fine.
Yeah, let's do a 5 minute break. We'll come back I'm on Central Time, like 10:23.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, y'all. All right, Amber, I think we're ready to keep this going. We did have a couple questions come up in the Q&A. Do you want to talk to those before you get back into your content?
Sure. What would that look like? Do you just read them?
Yeah, if you go to the bottom there, you should see a Q&A box. I think you just had a couple. It looks like Bill may also jump in a little bit there too. But that first one, how do you feel about self-disclosure to aid rapid rapport building? There's a few there. Do you see them?
I do not. I see the chat box.
It should be right next to like your share button at the bottom.
Oh, I told you I'm a Teams girly, so Zoom is so foreign to me. Okay, yeah, cool. So, how do you feel about self-disclosure to aid rapport building if I have had similar experiences with substance use? That's a really great question. Um, Gosh, I almost wish that was like in the chat so other people can contribute. So, I personally, as an LPC, I think self-disclosure is really powerful. Self-disclosure could be a really great way to empathize and build rapport and trust within an individual. In my experience, with co-occurring populations, individuals with substance use almost want self-disclosure. They want to know that you get it and that you're one of them, and it's kind of like almost like a cultural thing. I think while self-disclosure is really powerful, it could be a trap almost to kind of slip into an imbalanced relationship where now the self-disclosure is, more about you than it is about the client. So this is gonna get me yapping. I'll just have to keep an eye on time. But I will say that if you are using self-disclosure, I would one, use it sparingly. I would also use the concepts tied to self-disclosure, but really, if you're using self-disclosure, um, stick to the empathy behind it, right? If you know that you can understand what the client is experiencing because of your own personal experience, I would really encourage you to have that come out through empathy, instead of just defaulting to disclosing your own story. But also, I would offer that before you self-disclose, which there's nothing wrong with it. If you want to self-disclose, that's okay, but just run through a couple quick questions of, is this disclosure going to help or hurt? Is this disclosure for them or for me? Is this disclosure necessary or can I get to the same point in a different therapeutic way? And if you kind of run through those questions and self-disclosure is deemed necessary, it's helpful, it's for them, I can't really get to it any other way than disclosing this part of me, then totally fine. Disclose. And I also understand that's going to be completely different based off the profession you are. So that is the perspective of an LPC therapist. However, if you are a peer specialist, right, self-disclosure is a really big part of that, of your job role and connecting and sharing your own experience to help motivate. So it depends on your role. So of course, check in with a supervisor that you might have. Talk that out with them and they can probably help guide it in a little bit more specific way because without knowing your job title it's really hard for me to offer that so those are just some things that I consider the pros and cons. Is going to help or hurt? Is this for me or for them? And is there any other way that I can get to the point, and if not, then self-disclose just sparingly. Can you provide strategies to assist teens who self-harm? Yeah, 100%. So I'll be very transparent. The majority of my experience is with co-occurring adults. However, I've never worked with teens specifically, but well, I have, and they're technically adults though. 18 is an adult. When I was with a local university working with at-risk students, there were individuals who were 18 years and up. So specific teens I can't speak to, but I will speak to strategies to help with self-harm. Um, for that same kind of concept supply is we want to really use pros and cons of that behavior. We want to, especially for young adults, I'll speak to it's the closest I can get to teens. For young adults, they are really big on that contingency management, that reward. They want to know that their behavior is being seen and praised and, um, you know, awarded for the big efforts that they're doing, which could really boost their self-esteem too. And that's where I would lean into the young adult specifically is that self-esteem part, building their confidence that they can change. And I would also say specifically with self-harm, really take that non-judgmental space to like almost normalize, right? The desire to punish or self-harm. It's something that other people may experience, and there should be no judgment tied for that. For my experience with individuals with self-harm, there's a lot of shame tied to like maybe the scarring or what's left of their body from self-harming. Um, so really normalize that experience for them. And, we all have those unhealthy coping skills. This was yours. With that being said, and then start initiating that conversation. Build rapport, don't be judgmental, use empathy, and see if we can kind of help motivate towards a healthier way to cope. I have a 13, oh no, another teenager. I have a 13-year-old client who was hospitalized for eating disorder for about 2 years ago. She's doing well with the food issues, but has started cutting. Okay, do you have any tips for me? So I will say that's awesome that she's doing well with that part of her story. It does sound like she started to, you know, look into other ways of punishment or self-harm. So what I just mentioned previously about self-harm, I would answer that way, but yeah, I'm going to stay away from specifically speaking regarding teens just because that's not the majority of my experience. Good questions though. All right, I'm going to X out of the Q&A. Callie, are we in a good space to keep going with presentation?
You had one question that came up through in the chat I wanted to bring your attention to.
Okay.
She's asked, how do you assist a client who has an external focus on others, feeling unappreciated, and they are coming in for support? I have a client who is a married mother who spends her time expressing how she's unappreciated and mistreated.
Wow. Okay. Can you repeat that first off?
Yes. How
I'm
do you
a
assist a
I'm a
client?
visual learner, so that was
I'm
not
trying to think where I could put
that.
it for you. I can put it free in the chat to you and you can read it. How's that
Yeah,
sound?
that'd be perfect.
Okay, there, I just sent it to
How
you.
do you assist a client who has external focus on others, feels unappreciated, and they are coming in for support. I have a client who is a married, oh, that does scream mother, right? That like nurturer, that people pleaser, that individual whose role is really like focused on other people, who spends her time expressing how she feels unappreciated and mistreated. How do you assist a client who has external focus on others, feels unappreciated, and they are coming in for support? Yes, wow, I can really relate to that. And I think, as helping professionals, I think it's really easy to identify the mothers that we're working with because they do really just give so much to other people, and it's almost like a thankless job, right? Unfortunately, some culture impact or some societal impact, it's a thankless job because it's expected, right? Well, you're the mother, of course you're going to do X, Y, and Z, and sometimes they don't really necessarily get that appreciation or recognition that they should. So with that being said, I love this. I could do 2 hours of just, conceptualizing, but I would really, a few things. First is just meeting them where they're at with that emotion. If she is coming to you for support because she feels unappreciated or mistreated, um, stick with the feelings around that, and really empathize with that, right? Show her empathy, show her validation to just really start to build that rapport, which I'm sure you naturally do, right? All of us who are professional helpers have that tendency to be empathetic and validating and, be just really supportive in that way. Now, I'd be curious what her treatment plan is or what she's looking to work on. What does support mean to her? Because that's going to really shape how I answer this next question, or the next part of the question. My personal experience with working with mothers in a residential setting specifically is not only empathizing and validating the emotion of not feeling supported or valued or appreciated, but it's really hard because they're so externally focused, right? They're so focused on what they give to others. I would really tap into their value system because they're so focused on the role of being a mother, but they forget that they're a person, behind that role. So, what values, made you want to be a mother? Well, I really value connection. Okay, and then we explore that value and maybe start to allow her to start acting in a way that aligns with that value of connection. Um, so how can you connect with others? Well, I tuck my kids in every night. Beautiful. Now, one step further, how can you connect with yourself? Excuse me. Because if I'm working with a mother who is externally focused and is looking for external validation to feel supported and appreciated and worthy, I'm going to meet her where she's at. I'm going to empathize that part of her because that's such a huge part of her. But I would hope that eventually we would start turning that perspective internal so that she can align with her values in a way that she's giving those values towards other people, but she's also applying them to herself. She can internally validate herself that even though someone didn't say thank you, she still feels worthy and appreciated and supported. And then I would also teach her assertive communication and boundaries so she feels comfortable and competent to express her needs to other people in her life, right? Hey, child who I love dearly, before I tuck you in, can you say thank you for tucking you in, right? And she can express those value or those boundaries to other people in her life, like her partner, her family, her friends, her kids, etc. So that's a really long-winded answer. I think that's a really important question, but definitely just to summarize, stick with the validation and the empathy. I really like to tap into the value system and have her act in a way that she's acting on those values externally, but then applying them internally. Tie that with internal validation. And then the final step would be like assertive communication of boundaries to other people in her life. Anything else before we get started, Callie? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you answered that perfectly. So I think we can hop back in. Thanks, Amber.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that stuff, guys. If I wish we had more like peer support with each other where we could just join a 2-hour chat and, talk about some things that we're experiencing with our clients. All right, so moving on. So, like we said, we stopped right before a break of evidence-based tools that can really help our clients navigate through the stages of change, right? So far we've learned what the stages of change are, what individuals may look like or present as in each stage, and also as the professional helpers, how can we help a client navigate through each stage to kind of progress along the model? One huge, huge, huge skill that I want to mention is the OARS skill, which is tied to motivational interviewing. This could be a 2-hour presentation within itself. So, motivational interviewing is a very collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication. What specifically is focused on in motivational interviewing is using language of change, right? So it's specifically designed to strengthen somebody's motivation for goals by identifying what internal motivation they already have. Um, it it's just I can't say this enough. Like, not only what we say matters, but it's also like how we say it. And that's really where OARS can help be a helpful tool of making sure that what we are saying is being delivered in a way that's really beneficial for the client to hear to help them tap into that internal motivation. So OARS, OARS, or there is an additional letter towards the end. Of OARS-I. It's a popular skill utilized to really encompass the core concepts of motivational interviewing. So the O stands for open-ended questions. Open-ended questions get the clients talking, right? Because they don't let the individual answer with just like one word answers. Don't get me wrong, closed-ended questions are great for like collecting like data, information, details. But if you're looking to connect with somebody as they are experiencing a possible change, or they're even pre-contemplation. Maybe they don't even know that they want to change yet. Open-ended questions really allow the client to expand on where they're at, expand and give some additional information that's going to help you not only connect with them to start building rapport, but it's going to also allow you to start identifying key themes or concepts related to that individual that you can use later in the change process. So, this is one of the hardest skills that I needed to learn when I started as a helping professional. I worked with some really resistant individuals who really wanted to stick to the yes and the no's and the goods and the bads. They really wanted to stick to one word answers. So it took a lot of creativity on my end to start understanding how to reword, like, are you doing okay today? Right? Yes or no. To how are you feeling today? What feeling are you experiencing today? Right? It took me some time to get creative on like how to reword some of the questions that I was actually looking for, or the answer to get the answers that I was actually looking for. So open-ended questions are huge. It helps as it invites an individual to not only like reflect, but also elaborate, which increases your ability as the helping professional to understand the person's perspective. The A stands for affirmations. That is a motivating statement that focuses on the strength. That can be, it can be descriptive, but also not critical. R stands for reflective listening. So, which reflective listening is when we essentially repeat back what we heard the individual say. Um, it shows the individual that we're actually listening to them and offers a chance for us to interpret what they mean, which can evoke a deeper connection and help kind of unearth like really big therapeutic concepts. So, reflective listening, if someone maybe said, I don't know, maybe they were talking about change and their failed attempts to change, right? They might be saying something like, I'd be a lot farther along if everyone just butted out, right? If I'm reflecting back what I just heard the client say, I'm going to take the fact, right? People butting out, but I'm also going to unearth like a little bit deeper of the emotion behind that statement, right? So I might reflect back and say, it sounds like you have a lot of frustration when people interfere with your life. This really just allows the client to feel seen, feel heard. I'm not just hearing the words that they're saying, but I'm hearing I'm reflecting back like not only what they're saying, but the emotion that might be tied to what they're saying. Now finally, summarizing. So summarizing is a bit different than reflecting, right? When we're summarizing, we identify like the larger concepts, the larger themes that we're trying to reflect on, right? So what is happening in the moment? A summary should support that we were indeed listening, right? And it shows an understanding of what the individual is trying to communicate to you, right? So they might be really emotionally fueled, just stuck in a really big rant. But if we're truly asking open-ended questions, affirming what we're hearing, reflecting back, the summary is going to allow us to kind of tie in some other therapeutic concepts that might want to explore with the client. So it also ensures that nothing is missed, right? If we're summarizing the conversation, we're highlighting what we heard, what we picked up on, but it allows the client to say, well, wait a second, I actually said this too. So it allows us to get really just on the same page with the client, identify any important concepts that they wanted to communicate that we maybe have missed, but it also shows them that we're getting it, right? We're comprehending, not just hearing the words, but we're comprehending the meaning behind the words. Again, it helps us identify patterns or related concepts. It also helps us identify any discrepancies or ambivalence that we might be hearing in the conversation. And this just allows us to provide like an overall wrap up of what was being discussed. So that way um, we can kind of like say, okay, based off of everything that you just said, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm feeling, this is a key theme in your life. And then what, right? And then we move them along to a different conversation, which is a more direct conversation tied to the client in regards to their change. So OR's very big, popular skill in motivational interviewing, and motivational interviewing is quite that. It's a way to collaboratively speak with a client, or an individual and help them feel motivated to get through whatever change they might be considering. So very practical integration of what we chatted about today. So we want to assess the stages of change quickly, right? We want to be able to understand what an individual may look like when they are in a specific stage and identify that, pinpoint that. So then we can match our intervention to the need within that stage. This is my personal experience. We might want to also consider collaborating with an interdisciplinary team or external supports. So again, this individual, especially if they're pre-contemplation stage, they don't even know that they have a problem. It might be helpful to collaborate with their PCP based off of what they've been like going to the doctor for a couple of years. It might be important to collaborate with their spouse who's been begging them to change for years. It's really important that we don't take on all the responsibility on ourselves. If the client is willing and able to open up the conversation to these external supports, like an interdisciplinary team or external supports that they have in their own life, highly recommend doing that. But then also we just use motivational strategies to across the entire planning stage. We don't just get them to motivate towards preparation, then leave them high and dry, right? If we are a true helping professional, we are seeing this through with our client each step of the way. So one final group activity that I would like to leave on, based off of what we chatted about, write one motivational intervention for each stage of change and share that with the group. This is where I want this in the chat so you guys can start building your toolkit from each other, right? So based off of pre-contemplation, tell me what motivational intervention that you would use in that stage, and go through all the way through the relapse cycle. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse recycle. Each stage, what is one motivational intervention you would use for a client in that stage? Share it in the group. Take screenshots, copy and paste, build off of each other. Someone might think of something that you didn't. I see right now education, psychoeducation. Yes, if someone is pre-contemplative, they're not even aware of a problem, simply educating them on the concepts of mental health or substance use or the stats tied to the problematic behavior might be very helpful, not only in pre-contemplation, but contemplation as well. So I'm going to take a couple moments that people can contribute. Um, and then, like I said, guys, like this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to lean into peers that are doing the same type of work, maybe with a different population. Learn from each other. If you see something that jumps out that we either didn't talk about today or you are unfamiliar with what that means and you want to research it later, write it down so you have access to it later. Empty chair. Nice. Cool. You guys are doing great. It's going so fast. I'm seeing some good ones, and then in a split second, it's gone. Empathy, validation, great. Don't forget the basics, right? Um, Empathy and validation should really be a part of each of these stages because, like I said, change is scary. Prep resources, yeah. Especially if we're getting creative on what like us as a professional helper like role is, sometimes a therapeutic session, and especially if someone's in preparation, is maybe just getting in front of a computer, getting resources available, getting web pages for a client to look at later could be really, really helpful, especially if they're starting to feel really overwhelmed with what possible options are out there. Mindfulness skills, yes, I love that. Unconditional positive regard, especially for pre-contemplation, right? We're not judging, we're really taking more of a Rogerian stance with them in the pre-contemplation, which actually makes me want to mention too. I just want to be very clear that motivational interviewing is not the same as person-centered therapy. Um, there might be some similar concepts that overlap, but they are very different. One is quite literally a therapeutic orientation, but motivational interviewing, you do not need to be a therapist to engage in MI. It is a collaborative conversation that, you know, not just therapists can do. Strengths-based approach, yes, I love that. Everybody has their own personal strengths tied to them, and really eliciting them and using them in the change process could be very, very powerful. We don't want to make change harder than it is, right? So if someone has natural strengths that they can identify and pull out and use in the change process, in a way, it makes it just a little less difficult. Relapse prevention plans, 100%. There's a ton of relapse prevention plans accessible out there on the internet. Um, some are very detailed. Some are a little bit more skimpy, based off your client needs and, you know, how they learn best. Pick one that works for them, right? Don't be one size fits all. I had a client who, you know, had a difficult time with reading comprehension. So the really detailed relapse prevention plan that I liked as a student didn't work for him. So we created one that worked well for him, that was easy to read, and that he could manage the information better. Defuse the relapse. Oh, I lost that. And turn it into a learning experience. Yes. Huge, huge, huge. Good. Life balance wheel. I think I know. I think I remember that. Kind of like seeing what the whole picture of life could look like, I think. I'm gonna have to look that up. Life balance wheel. I haven't heard that in a while. I think it's seeing all the many concepts of life and like breaking down realistic, like how much time portion it is. We have to look that up. And honestly, guys, based off of some of the Q&A, if you have any personal experience with working with teens, feel free to put that information into the chat. Like, again, that's just not a population that I've interacted with often. Maybe as an undergrad, I had some experience with teenagers, but not enough to speak on. All right. So, to wrap up, I'm just trying to be mindful of time. We have some key takeaways. Motivation is fluid, it's not fixed, which is why the stages of change model is it's cyclical, right? It's not linear. Change is not linear. You do not hit every stage in an equal and fair way. Setbacks happen, barriers happen, motivation ebbs and flows, right? Someone might be really stoked and you did a lot of great work with the client and they pull the plug on the plan last minute and they, go back to that maladaptive behavior, um, which could be a really frustrating experience. Um, as a helping professional, but that's where it's not about us, right? We stick with the client and we meet them where they're at. We always default to that empathy, that non-judgmental space, that validation, and we gently prompt them with facts, pros and cons, like we go back to the basics in that way. Co-occurring individuals may cycle stages more often. Unfortunately, they have a few more risk factors to their story compared to other people who are not co-occurring clients. And it's really important that we tailor interventions, which is going to improve engagement and outcome. So one size does not fit all when it comes to change, right? It's really important that we take time to truly get to know the individuals we're working with, to know what works for them, what fuels them, what motivates them, and we take that information to apply that to our interventions. Also, the strengths, right? We get to know that their own individual strengths are, and we tailor the game plan to highlight and bring out those strengths. Taking it one step further, we can also identify some areas of opportunity or those learning opportunities that they have, right? Those weaknesses that they have. And we maybe sprinkle some of that in to start building on some of those weaknesses to make them a little bit stronger. Closing reflection prompt. What's one strategy from today that you'll bring into your next session? So you guys have been doing great. You've been very communicative in the chat. I'm not necessarily looking for you guys to answer this in the chat. If you want to, that's great. That'll be some great external validation for me, that knowing that you took away something. But just something to consider, right? We've all been doing continuing educations, and it's really important that we're applying the information that we're learning. So I'm very curious to hear what's one strategy from today that you're like, yes, I'm working with somebody right now that this is the missing piece. This is definitely something that I can apply for our next session. And that is all I have.
Amber, thank you so much. I know this felt a little out of your wheelhouse to present, but you did such a good job and yeah, very engaging. So thank you again.
Yes.
For those of you that want to come back, I will put the registration link in the attendee dashboard, as well as the recording will be up today. So if you want to reflect or share this with a coworker, please do, and please come back and see us. I plan on having the rest of 2026 uploaded into CEGO so you can register for as many as you want by the end of January. But for right now, just January is listed. So thank you, Amber. Thank you all again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy your holiday, everybody.
Thank you.